You're no doubt familiar with the problem. Your team comes to you with charts and dashboards telling you that KPIs and KRAs aren't being hit, but no one knows why, no one knows how critical the problem is, what to do about it, and they certainly can't do anything about it without calling in an army of people to help them. And then the questions start. Is the problem technical? Is it procedural? Is it a demand side problem or a supply side problem? Is it isolated or is it correlated? Is it important enough to fix it now, or can it wait while we complete more pressing priorities? In essence, everyone's asking versions of the same question. What changed? When what everyone really wants to know is why has it changed and what, if anything, should we do about it? Or as my mentor once said to me, I don't need you to tell me it's raining. I need you to bring me an umbrella. Welcome to another episode of the AI Forecast, proudly sponsored by Cloudera. I'm your host, Paul Muller. Join me along with leading companies and industry experts as we explore the past, the present, and the future of data and AI in the enterprise. And if you are a regular listener, and I hope you are, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with others who might find the podcast valuable. Well, today we're going to take a look at what's wrong with the culture of reactive reporting and how agentic AI might unlock a bias for action where right now teams are often stuck in analysis paralysis. Joining me to discuss this topic, this vexing topic, is Bhaskar Sunkara. Bhaskar is a software engineer by background, more than 25 years experience in software engineering and enterprise tech. We've got a common background in application monitoring way back in the early days of both of our careers, but with a particular expertise in AI and real-time analytics. He's then gone on to become the founder and CEO of Bicycle AI, and he's on a mission to help organizations detect, explain, and resolve revenue-critical issues in real time using agentic AI. He's speaking my language. Welcome to the podcast, Bhaskar.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Where do we find you in the world today?
I am in San Francisco. I'm in the Valley in San Francisco right now.
Lovely part of the world. Excellent.
Yeah.
We are going to get into, I guess, this topic of the delusion of dashboards, if you don't mind me using a alliteration. But before we do that, we like to do our lightning round first at the AI Forecast. Are you ready to...
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, first question. What would people who know you best, Bhaskar, say is your superpower?
Looking at something complex and translating it, some sort of like abstract thinking in terms of how I think about concepts and how I break them down and make them simpler for people to understand. That's probably what I would say.
The most impactful technology of all time?
I think I got to say, obviously AI is sweeping all of us right now, but I feel maybe the Transistor, because that's just enabled everything. The fact that you could, it's the first part of the digital footprint, and I think that's what comes to my head right now.
I love that. One of the things that I find mind blowing is when you look back at the size of the original transistors, and you compare them to what they are now.
What they are now, it's phenomenal.
It's incredible, isn't it?
The advances are phenomenal. Absolutely,
it's unbelievable. All right, we're going to talk about what AI can automate for the business in just a moment. But what would you like to see AI automate for you personally in your future?
My future, I think a lot of like the day-to-day stuff, in terms of the mechanical, whether it's sort of like the email stuff and anything that doesn't need a lot of my sort of think time in terms of making decisions, automating all the data, and I can package some of my basic decision-making and logic into it. So some of the day-to-day stuff, especially email to start with.
Clone Bhaskar,
yeah, exactly.
Copy paste.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Excellent. All right. And last but not least, you've been working with data for a long time.
Yeah.
Like we said, our histories are intertwined going back, 20 plus years. What are some of the best practices you've learned as someone who's worked with data most of their life?
Couple things, right? Like number one, I feel like people start with data to sort of like bottom up with the data set and everything else. And people don't think a lot about what's the point of this? Like, what should it inform? Like, what's the decision I should take on top of like, why am I collecting this data and like top down, what it should actually be doing? That's one thing. The second thing is I feel when you're analyzing data, how do you separate what is deterministic and what's probabilistic? As you're analyzing a lot of that. So, and I think I'm biased because that's one of the key things with our philosophy in like the day-to-day stuff we're doing. But that's kind of the other piece. And then maybe final piece is if you're arriving at a decision, if you're doing something, you want to be sure that you can trace it. You can kind of actually figure out, this is how I got to it. Is the data that I'm getting to, was that actually trusted to start with, and things like that? Because before you know it, you're working with like a decision that's just not grounded in reality. That happens a lot.
Yeah. Well said. Let's get into then talking about this topic of, I suppose, agentic analysis of business data.
Mm-hmm.
And what I really, like this idea of not what, but why is my business doing what it's doing?
Yeah. Yeah.
What prompted you to look at this space? Because you've got a background in application monitoring and diagnostics, right? So what prompted you to fork so heavily into looking at this business problem?
I mean, I think there are definitely connections back to what, we were doing at AppD, and the way we were kind of going about it. So just to kind of, rewind back a little bit, the problem we were solving definitely at AppD was application performance monitoring. But, it was all about what unit did we pick to actually monitor, right? Because pre-AppD, what people used to monitor was code, queries, CPU, stuff like that. So we used to work at Wiley, both Jyoti and I, right? And Wiley was very focused on how do I measure code, CPU, queries, and all of that type of stuff. But what happens with that is the rate of change is so high that if you're measuring code, your code's changing, and then you're boom, like, the whole thing. You're measuring queries, and tomorrow you migrate to NoSQL. What happens then, right? So we basically picked a metric which was called the business transaction, which is basically saying, irrespective of what my architecture is and how many times I'm rewriting and re-architecting my code, the amount of time it takes for someone to check out or at an aggregate or an individual level always matters. And so that's what we call the business transaction. And so that's the foundation of AppD. And that is one of the reasons why we got the traction we got it, because that appealed to the operator who did not know the code, did not know the queries, but needed to operate, the application.
So if I could paraphrase, you started off monitoring, instead of monitoring this, as you say, the CPU performance or the memory consumption or that granular thing, back to your point about data, you stepped up, started monitoring the business application and application metrics, and obviously very successful. This is really taking that idea one step further from what I can tell.
One step further. Because in fact, like there is a there's some connective tissue between that also. So we obviously started with the Java monitoring, and over time we added, other languages like .NET, browser-based, and, PHP, etc. But later part of AppD, we added this product called Business IQ, which what it did was, if there's an outage, so let's just say a checkout's failing for X amount of people, what Business IQ would do is to look at that data on who were the actual customers who actually had an unsuccessful checkout. And then the customer would send them a gift card saying, hey, I'm sorry, whatever. And so you're now getting down to the detail versus just looking at like an application problem. And so that was a very successful product. Obviously, we had the benefit of selling on top of, captive audience who were already using AppD, so it was much easier. And so that was Business IQ. And over time, I think for me, the question was, why not be proactive? So this was a reactive approach on something happened and I'm calculating impact and what segment was impacted. But what about if you looked at all the segments that were meaningful to the business and used those as KPIs to operate versus sort of like reactively looking at some reports or dashboards for those KPIs? So that's kind of the connective tissue between them. But that's how I got into, like, to your point, it's a step up, but there's some sort of like, train of thought that flows through that.
What's the problem with enterprise level reporting today, in your opinion, and particularly enterprise level reporting and reactions to KPI drift?
So I think there are really two options, right? In terms of if you don't become proactive, reactively, there are only two options. It's either dashboards or chat. And chat's sort of like relatively newer AI, right? It's a chatbot, right? Like that's sort of like the AI part of it. The issue with dashboards is that, they have a place. Like, it's a great shared document. When you get into a meeting, you can look at it and talk through stuff and things like that. But when you want to put that into decision making, it has a lot of issues. It's number one, it's not scalable, as in like let's say your KPI is revenue and you're selling 50 products and you're doing that in 50 regions. So now, I mean, who's looking at like all the 50 regions and all the 50 products, and also looking at product cross region? So that just multiplies and multiplies and multiplies. So humanly, it's just not possible to stay on top of a dashboard all the time, right? You have to sort of like, it's not wired. Like I like to say, analytics is not operational enough, and monitoring or operations is not analytical enough, right? Like you operate at a very, very coarse level, and when you do the analytic stuff, it's just not operational enough. So how do you bridge that gap? And that's what dashboards doesn't do. And so now the other option is you go to chat, and so you have to suspect something, you have to know something is up, and you're asking that question. So people are like, you can talk to your data. Who wants to talk to data? Like data should be telling you and inform you, about this is what's up. And that's the point of AI versus, you have a natural language interface, like you don't have to put queries in. That's great. It makes it way more accessible. Again, it has its place just like dashboards because you're curious, you want to drill down, etc. But you can't operate on that, right? You have to be proactive when you're operating because you want the AI to say, I'm on top of all your 50 regions and your 50 products and 50 to 50 products and regions. And I'm going to tell you when, revenue in San Francisco is either dropping or has a bad trend or has a bad forecast. And if AI does that, that's when it becomes proactive.
All right. So let's talk about this because I suppose in summary, we've got a lot of application data and business data and telemetry.
Correct.
The big question becomes, then why do organizations still struggle to just understand what's happening in their own businesses?
We talk about this all the time, like, because when you think about something that's a basic question, so let's just take an example of why is my revenue down? Why is my revenue falling? The problem is it's actually not such a basic question because you have to start thinking about like, is it falling from the usual normal range on Wednesdays, or is it worse? What segment is it falling in? And then you start thinking about what is sort of like the area, which is it like a discovery problem where people are not able to discover the product? Is it basically like a pricing problem where, maybe your competition is pricing better than you? Is it sort of like an inventory problem where you're showing stale inventory or you're out of stock? Is it a checkout problem where it's like you have technical issues, like you have something off in your iOS version that's preventing you from checkout? Is it a payment router? Did sort of like something change in the traffic quality? Is it a supplier issue? So all of these make up that to be a complex, multi-part question. And the answers to all of these lie in different areas because every team has their own thing. Every team has their own dashboard. Payment operations is very different from revenue operations. They're doing their own thing. And then it's hard to just like put it all together.
It's not a lack of data problem though, is it? It's more of a correlation problem then?
It's a correlation and context problem. It's a problem where you're not able to have like a shared ontology that drives decision making across all these layers or across all the causes, right? So when you have a KPI drift, the factors that can be impacting it can be both technical and business. They can also be external, where macro factors are driving it. Like your ticket bookings might be up because it's sort of like Thanksgiving and people are buying more tickets for Thanksgiving, and it's not like your business contributing to it. But, it could also be due to competition. It could also be due to inventory, like a bunch of things that I said. That's where the issue is. Like you struggle to have a shared structure that can go through both of these areas. And then again, especially because, with your background in monitoring, one of the things to think about is that if you're looking at both technical factors and business factors, technical factors are much more machine readable because it's response time, it's, load, it's errors, it's telemetry, it's logs. It's much more understandable. There's systems, When you go to the business side of things, it's much more gnarly, right? Like, it could be pricing, it could be inventory, it could be policy changes, it could be authentication stuff that you set up based on like something complex. It could be contracts. There's a bunch of things that are happening. It could be like seasonality, and it could be like, any sort of external factors like macro conditions. Now, the reason why it's a great time to now say we can triage the technical factors and the business factors is because LLMs can now do sort of natural triage over all of this unstructured data, right? No matter where it lives. But you have to have a connecting thread on, I'm actually triaging all this revenue stuff and I can now go into the business stuff. And so now you can do technical factors, business factors, which are the things that actually drive the business. So that's actually one of the reasons why we call what we do bicycle, because it's the two wheels of the business and we're able to reason across both, you know?
I love it. So there's obviously a huge domain of different business process problems that can occur at any point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, let's take the revenue one as an example, because I guess it's
Yeah.
you know, if that, in terms of the long-term success of the business, you know, it is one of the leading KPIs, if not the leading KPI.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I came to my team today, I'll use the word traditional approach, if the word traditional can be used in such a rapidly changing environment. But if I'm a CFO or a CEO, a business leader as I am today, and I went to my team and said, hey, revenue seems to be, in fact, to your point, I don't.
Yeah.
I usually ask the question, what's revenue likely to do is usually the first question I ask, right? Is it likely to go up or down? But, you know, we have a glitch and the team come to me and say, hey, it looks like we're going to miss this quarter. And my first question is going to be why?
Yeah.
That's a question that's been in business probably 2,000 years.
For sure.
At least in the modern context, how are people responding to the answer to that question compared to maybe what they could be doing? So let's start with how people are currently approaching.
Yeah. So a lot of it is, you know, let's just take a simple situation. Let's say, you know, your source of truth is in the warehouse and, you know, you're on BigQuery or in Snowflake and you have all of that data. What happens right now is a lot of it is also anecdotal. There's not a lot of proactive versus, or it could also be, hey, someone's looking at the right dashboard at the right time, or someone's asking the right questions. And so let's say they spotted it, right? Like, let's just say detection is a solved problem.
A lot of luck involved there.
A lot of luck involved there. Exactly. It's not somebody watching over it specifically all the time, but there's a lot of luck involved there. And then people also like rig up, couple triggers on top of like the warehouse and set some alerting on it. Like it's a bunch of like homegrown stuff, but there's no real like, like industrial like tooling on this is what it does, similar to how APM has solved that problem for technical sort of metrics and, telemetry. So once you do that, once you're like, hey, I found it, then most of it is on Slack. You're like, hey, revenue is down here. So then somebody's going to look at it and say, it seems to be localized to this and this, seems to be this factors. And then the Slack's sort of saying, what did we change? Did we change like spend in this region? If you're tracking like at a marketing level or something, what kind of other policies changed? Then you got to go look at, did something change in releases? Maybe it's a customer experience problem. Maybe people are dropping off because, there's something off with the app. And so I'm going to go check in Full Story to see what the recordings were like. I'm going to go check in Datadog to see if there was some service issue because of which it slowed down. Meanwhile, I'm going to verify if you're not serving like stale inventory. That's just completely different, right? So it is like, the whole, if I can call it an investigation, root cause, whatever, it takes way too long and your revenue is on the line. But what's surprising is that no one's really quantifying it. So you just think of it as the cost of doing business. You're like, yeah, that's going to happen anyway. So it takes you hours, takes you days to come up with like, I've done the whole thing. And after you finish, you realize that all this work that you did is not reusable. It's tribal, right? And so there'll be an analyst who'll know that. And the next time he'll be faster, next time he'll be quicker because he'll be like, oh, the release thing keeps screwing it up. So that happened. And so they're using that. And as a result, what's happening is as your business is growing, you're just hiring more analysts and you're kind of scaling like that. I've talked to a couple of really senior leaders where they're like, I'm so tired of hiring 4 analysts per quarter as my business grows. So, and it's just not reusable and it's just like wholly dependent on like the tribal knowledge someone accumulates.
Well, and I'm just thinking as I was listening to you describe that, and certainly one of the things that I've witnessed in businesses I work with is as you say, when people go off, so the CEO or the CFO, the CRO starts screaming and saying, hey, numbers don't look good, what's going on?
Yeah.
You are looking for problems. You are looking for what's changed.
Yeah.
That leads to confirmation bias as well. So people are saying,
Yeah.
I'm going to go looking, oh, we changed the software. Oh, we changed our marketing spend. So everyone comes back saying, I think I've found the problem.
Yeah.
This changed, which of course, what's not happening is those things aren't being correlated and filtered, and you have no sense of causality in that process. So
you're not going the other way.
Yeah, exactly, right? The second problem I see when we talk about this is the process of even understanding and describing the business. If I was to go and see my team today and ask them, hey, with the quote to cash process, what does that process looks like? Who owns it? What systems does it touch? You used the word ontology before, but the system that supports your business is often not well understood by any one particular individual. How do you crack the code on that problem?
So I think when I talk about ontology, I talk about actually not like the overall sort of large business model ontology, but the ontology where at a minimum, what it really does is very, very specific to handle decision making. So think about, like, bear with me for a second. If you think about creating an ontology for decision making, what that will have is it'll start from signal. So it'll basically have three models. It'll have the signal model, it'll have the cause model, it'll have the action model. Like, how do you go from signal to action, right? If you unpack signal, basically the core of it will be, let's just call them events, transactions. That's the raw data that you talk about. And then you have dimensions, like all my products, all my suppliers, all my airlines, all my regions, all my merchants, all my, payment gateways. So that's the core of it. And then they eventually create KPIs. The KPIs are derived from raw searches, checkouts, bookings, payments. That's how you create KPIs, right? So all you need in your core ontology for the signal model is, these are the events, these are the dimensions, and this is the KPI. So that's your signal model. Your cause model is basically the causes, the potential causes for the KPI drifts, for the KPIs that are present in the signal model, right? Because you're looking at technical changes, you're looking at, like, so they could be marketing changes, they could be inventory changes, they could be pricing changes, they could be like technical changes, but it's a constrained set of your causes or drivers, right? Actually, drivers is the better word. Like, what are driving these KPI drifts? And that's your cause model, right? And then eventually you have your action model, which is basically saying, well, if pricing is the issue, then a potential action is reducing the price. And, whether you automate it or not, whether it's human in the loop or not, is irrelevant. It doesn't really matter. That's your model. So that's what we kind of try and do. Like, we're not boiling the ocean saying, let's figure out all of the business and all of the business map, because that's just like a very hard problem. Let's stay in data. Let's stay within the constructs of what the business is doing in terms of how it's performing. And that's just KPIs, pretty much. So we anchor on that and then do sort of a solid job on drivers and actions. But the most important thing here is that all of this ontology, LLMs are very suited to really build out this ontology as a first pass.
That was going to be my question, is the thing that as I'm listening to you, my initial response is, or reaction is, as a business leader, is, gosh, that sounds complex.
Yeah.
Do I have to build these myself, or can I use, for want of a better term, you've got LLMs for language? Can I have an LBM, a large business model?
Exactly, that's what we do. So that's why when you start, like it starts with understanding how your business works, where it's like, we come in with an opinion of what events matter, what dimensions describe your business, how your KPIs are actually calculated, what patterns are worth paying attention to, what kind of things typically cause these patterns to be off, and what actions your teams can take safely. And if you have a bunch of stuff already created, like in dbt or something where you have a semantic model, we will import from that. Like, that's step number one. Once you deploy us, though, right, over time, we will actually learn which KPIs actually matter, which anomalies are actually good versus noise. So that's just the compounding part of it. But we come in with that where you don't have to sort of, and then we built an agent that can take your data in Snowflake or wherever it is to map it to this ontology. So not only do we have like the, in your words, large business model, especially for decision making, but we have an agent that actually maps the data onto it, because that's, again, a lot of grunt work.
So question for you then, as I start to think about solving this problem.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about the quantity and quality of data that we have as businesses.
Yeah.
How much data, historical data, do I realistically need in order to be able to get useful insights? Is it months, years, decades?
I think once it crosses an year, I feel like it's pretty useful already. It also obviously depends on the density. How dense is it? How sparse is it? A lot of times it's also dependent on, if you have 20 products, like, you have high density of data for the top 10, but like it just sort of tapers down for the next 10, stuff like that. But yeah, if you have like good, high density, solid data for about 13, 15, 18 months or so, that's actually pretty good to spot patterns, because all of the seasonality parts, all of these sort of like aspects of the repeatability there are pretty good there. So that's what we do. Customers give us, start with 18 months, sometimes 24 months, 2 years of data. But we've seen that to be pretty good. In sparse data, you have to get a little more like tactical in terms of like being more static and sort of like saying, more than 5 a month or something like that, right? Like, because you don't have a lot of data to sort of like really have a pattern around.
As we talked about in the opening, my old mentor used to say, it was his guidance to me when dealing with managers who were bringing me problems, and he just said, you need to change your perspective. You're hiring them to solve problems, not just point them out. So, you need to tell them, don't tell me it's raining, bring me an umbrella, which I always
bring an umbrella. Yeah.
But it captures the essence of it, right? It's like, yeah, I can see it's raining. I'm getting wet. I need you to solve my problem.
Yeah.
Having a tool that, even if it's a traditional tool that's, or worse still, one of your managers coming to you going, hey, sales are down. You're like, great. Why? And more importantly, what are we going to do about it? Have these tools and technologies reached the point where guided recommendations are possible, or is that still a future thing?
I think they are, but that's sort of, as we were talking about the best practices, that's sort of also where you get to, the difference between deterministic and probabilistic, right? Like, because if you want to determine KPI drift, that is a deterministic problem, and you have to use machine learning or something equivalent for it. But when you want to theorize what to do about it, then you go more into the, start going more into the probabilistic world, because a lot of times when revenue is down, let's say, sometimes it's not one cause, right? It could be a mix in traffic. It could be some issue with the app, and everything kind of adds up. And you have to sort of like list down all possible drivers. And this is sort of like the ratio. This is what they're contributing to. And then you have to work through that thesis, and then for each one, you can have an associated action linked to it, right? So that's sort of like almost how you start off with saying, how do you go from that to maybe human in the loop action or recommended action? And over time, you can get better and better. In fact, one of our customers is a large online travel agency. What they do is that typically when you book a ticket, sometimes you have issues with the suppliers in the back end who are processing your ticket. And sometimes it's localized to a particular region, particular city, etc. And so we have a real-time feedback loop with them where if we see that a particular supplier has more errors than usual, we run a webhook so that we take the supplier out of that circuit. It's called a circuit breaker use case in this one. And then when they're back to normal, they're put back in. So you stop losing revenue, and they're kind of sure about the case. And it's very fine grained, right? Like the purpose of the AI is to actually isolate the 1 in 200 suppliers that has the issue. So now your surface area is pretty low. And so that's why it's sort of automated. But I always like to say autonomy is something where you're like, it has to be like earned over time. You can't come in and say, I'm just going to automate this, man. That just doesn't work.
Automation has to be earned. Well, that was going to be my question, because what we've described sounds to me, at least at the moment, like taking what I would describe as an AI augmented analytics approach.
Yeah.
Where do agents? What role do agents or agentic technology play in this process?
One simple way of thinking about the process is that at a very basic level, when you work with data and you want some results out of it, you need a really good data analyst. You need a really good business analyst, right? The data analyst is like, superpower is data. Like I can crunch, I can look at patterns. You give me a set of data. I don't really care what it belongs to. I'm going to crunch it and give you an answer. That's the data analyst. The business analyst is, what is worth it that I pass on to my data analyst? Like, what are the KPIs that matter? What are the dimensions that matter, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think of the LLMs and the AI layer as the business analyst. I think about machine learning as the data analyst. And if you have a system that can wire it together where the LLMs are orchestrating, hey, here is the, like, let's look at checkout sort of like conversion. That's the case. That's the thing that's the most important to the company. And that's what a business analyst can bring to the table. And then when it needs to map, the business analyst can come up with basically saying, here are the typical dimensions you need to map. And so you can actually start doing some mapping based on the data given to you because he understands the dimensions involved. And then and then it can propose, here are the KPIs, again, based off of industry knowledge. It can propose, here are the typical KPIs that happen, here are based on the use case. And then it can also propose the cause model. It can also propose sort of like the action model. So if you separate out the responsibilities as sort of like the LLM playing like the business analyst role, and sort of like the machine learning playing the data, or any kind of math that you're doing, which is more deterministic, that gives you a good way of really thinking about the solution, whether you're building it yourself, whether you're using something else. But that's my mental model of how to really solve it.
And I bring that up only because you talked about then the role of humans. So agentic and automation is a critical component there. So we think something's happening, the agents kick off and I presume gather more data and look at potential next steps and so forth.
Yeah.
To your point then, what role do humans continue to play as AI becomes more capable? Are we steering the tools? Are we the decision makers? Can we take a more where do people fit in at the end of the day? They
are the decision makers, because I feel like whether an agent does it or whether it's a human in the loop, ultimately judgment should be reserved for the human, right? And so that is one of the biggest challenges I feel on how user experience, UX, UIs actually go into the next zone, because they're a medium between, agents and humans and decision making. And so it's not just about, hey, the system has no UI, the agent does everything. It doesn't work that way. It has to be, decision making has to be, it depends on what the decision is, right? Like, is it reversible? What's the radius of it and all that stuff? It really depends on that also. So not all, like if I want to send like a notification to a team about something, like I don't need a human in it. Like you can do it. But if you want to go change the price of whatever on the website, you want a human to not only take action, but also be accountable for that decision. You can't just say that, like, that's the, like, at the end of the day, like, who's accountable for it? You get in a room, you're like, you raised the price that screwed things up. Like, who's responsible for it? So that's how, like, I think what products have to do. So that's why it's not just all about, like, running a bunch of queries on top of your LLM, because this has humans at play, and you have to be accountable for the judgment and the decision. So humans very much are at the center of it. Solutions need to multiply and force multiply what they're doing versus saying, oh, I don't really need humans in the loop. Maybe you need lesser. For example, instead of 40 analysts handling decision making, you can probably need 10, over time, because it's more efficient, but you can't really take them out of the loop. Otherwise, there's no accountability, and It doesn't even kind of make sense. But it's, like the starting point is always people start thinking about, well, there's really no humans. And I don't think that's a practical scenario.
One of the things that, as a business person, I feel like I've always wanted to have with me every time I build a team is a great chief of staff next to me.
Yeah.
Who kind of knows the business, knows the people, and is a real force multiplier for the commander's intent. Do you see a day where we could build? I mean, I suppose in Iron Man, what's the name of his agent? Is it Jeeves or whatever it is? I can't even remember. Marvel.
Yeah.
But you see Robert Downey Jr. talking to, or Tony Stark talking to his business robot, basically.
Yeah.
Do you see a point where we would have that we could build something like a chief of staff who effectively comes to me and says, look, I'm detecting these problems in the business. I think it looks like this. Is that science fiction to you, or is that something that you think that we will have?
I think it's real. When you think about what AI does or what agents do to decision making, a lot of it is like, how does the process go from, pull to push? Because agents are going to push the answers, and the insights kind of come to you, and then you can make decisions based off of that. But they're pre-processing a bunch of it. They're doing a first pass. And then depending on, like, for example, let's say if the agent's been running for a year, like the checkout conversion agent is running for a year, and it has seen about like 20 times the change in sales when you advertise a particular product on the homepage, right? You've set up enough guardrails for the agent to then take the decision saying, yeah, this is a pattern that I've seen over and over and over again. You can set a threshold to it. That's where guardrails come in. But at that point, it can take the decision. But before it takes a decision, even the part of the agent's actually telling you what to look at and calculate impact and tell you this is more important than the others, you can do a bunch of stuff. That's kind of what an efficient chief of staff does. It lines up decision making based on impact. Because it's not about, here's a list that's unprioritized and I have to make 20 calls. Because what's also important is like which one's more important than the others. And those are things that you can start automating and get AI to do.
Let's talk about another, I suppose, a follow-on question from the future. If I go back, as we started this podcast, your early career, hey, don't tell me, I don't want to know what my server is doing. I want to know what my application is doing, right? You've now gone to the next stage and gone, hey, I don't want to know what the application's doing. I want to know what the business is doing.
And I want to know the application, what application is doing, if that's the most relevant thing and it's in the way.
Yeah, what's important right now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you've obviously been thinking about complex problems and trying to simplify them for a long time.
Yeah.
As you sort of sit back and think in your in your quiet moments, you're maybe on a plane somewhere and thinking about all the great unsolved problems in enterprise AI. If there was one unsolved problem right now in enterprise AI that you could fix, what would that be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely biased with this problem, but and we've talked about this before, but it's just like, how quickly do you go from signal to action or a good decision? Because that's still like a hard one. And it's not just sort of like working with data, et cetera, right? Because I think the agent part like really opens up this area for, a tremendous amount of automation across the board, right? But the biggest issue with automation is that, does the agent have the right context to make the decision on whether I should do this or not? And that's more of a context issue versus like you wrote up an amazing agent. And that context typically lives outside the model, lives outside the code reasoning, and that is based off of all that has gone on in the company over the last 6 months, 1 year, et cetera. And that operating context or company intelligence is something that needs to be really clubbed with whatever AI does. So I think that's sort of like a meaty problem. And I'm not saying that just in terms of like in the context of analytics, but like broadly, Like you see a signal and you need to act on it, and like how quickly can you get to a good decision?
I want to take the contrarian view now, which is
Yeah.
And it's it's an odd way to finish the show. I probably should have flipped these questions in my
No
head, but
worries.
it just occurred to me. Again, you're a technologist, but you're also a business person.
Yeah.
You have a really good sense of what this technology is capable of doing and what it isn't capable of doing. In what way do you think that business people, boards, that expectations of what AI can do have overreached? In other words, are you seeing patterns as you go around the boardrooms of the companies of the world? Are you seeing maybe patterns or ideas that maybe non-technologists have misunderstood this, or maybe don't understand some of the limitations of this technology? And if the answer is no, then that's fine too.
No, it's actually linked to my previous answer. I feel like one of the things that just like is overblown is this whole like autonomy thing, and I think that's overestimated. It's not going to be just like off the bat autonomous in terms of like just like keep running it, and then also like the reasoning layer. People think that just because reasoning happened, the causation is certain, and it just doesn't work that way, right? Like, are you actually even working off of the right data? Is it sort of like a trusted foundation on top of which you're making that decision? Or is something broken in the chain where you actually looked at a fact, but that's not true? Just because a machine looked at it and reasoned over it. So I think those two things, right? Like, I mean, I feel like everybody overestimates autonomy. It's not just going to be that easy where you put an agent in and does everything for you. Again, demos look great, right? And that's where it's very deceptive. But making it a product takes a much longer time than a weekend. You could put together like a good sandbox demo where you're like, oh my God, this is just like, I don't have to do anything. And so it just doesn't work that way. So you have to be way more careful. And that's where there's going to be that gap of like the promise and what you'll get. And again, just because you have reasoning doesn't mean it has actually reasoned over accurate data, doesn't mean it is, you know what I mean? So people just don't talk about that enough.
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second, just only because you've reminded me, and I've said this on the show before. I was doing some vibe coding with Claude, and this isn't a Claude problem, it's an everything problem. And I was looking for it to build an API to Asana for a piece of software to connect a business process, right? Not an uncommon use case. And it built the code, and I compiled the code, and I ran the code, and it didn't work.
Yeah.
And obviously it then suggests, if you've done any vibe coding, it suggests possible problems.
Sure.
And you go working on those problems, and it works on those problems with you, and it's got me changing environment variables and doing all of this stuff. And two hours later, maybe that's an exaggeration, it felt like 2 hours later, I just had, I don't know why, I had a little idea and went, can you check that the API that you're using is the current API? And it went away and went, actually, you're right, it's not.
Yeah, it's not,
I completely screwed up. And you sit there thinking, because... to your point, it's a computer. When it says that it's a 1 or a 0, you believe it.
Yeah.
And I think, to your point, and I think what you're trying to say is it is probabilistic in nature. It probably is the API version that I'm using, but it equally could probably not be. And you might be wasting your time right now. And that's where the human. Am I hearing you correctly?
No, you're right. And the AI doesn't know that. It's almost like, it happens in humans also, right? Like when someone is super confident of what they're saying, you kind of assume that they're accurate. But, confidence is not a good proxy for accuracy a lot of times. And same thing applies to AI. It says things very, very confidently. It's not going to be like, reluctant. It's not going to be like half confident, but it might not be accurate. Like, so it's got to have the right foundation where it's doing the right thing. Otherwise, you're going to be like, oh yeah, this is fine. This is great, right?
It does seem like a trap that people are falling into, and I don't know. Is there a technological solution to that, or is that a behavioral and training problem?
Yeah, no, I think technologically, like as long as every answer has good traceability, and there's work done on, the corpus of data that the AI is working on to sort of like being able to certify it, making sure that it's actually like a continuous loop where you're kind of, it's a continuous process versus like you've certified it once, etc. So as long as you're sort of thinking about, is the answer defensible? Is the answer traceable on what it actually, can I trace it back to what it actually looked at? And I can verify it. And again, running evals, right? That's where evals are good for, did you pick the right KPIs? Did you do the right thing? And so that's why you have to sort of like really push that to that level. But yeah, there are some solutions for sure. Like I think, because the future is that's what's going to happen, but how do you engineer it in like this sort of like accurate way? That's really where I think the most of the work is.
Well, and I think, in my experience, and I really want to give you the last word on this.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of allowing people who understand the business less well to guide it, it emphasizes the opposite, which is you really need to understand your business.
Yeah.
Because you need to have good judgment as to whether or not that probabilistic advice makes sense and is coherent to your deep understanding of your business processes, of your customers, of your structures, your employees, of the behaviors. And if you don't understand that business really well, you'll let an authoritative sounding AI tool tell you what to do instead of you telling the AI what to do with authority.
I think I would summarize it this way, right? As we're wrapping, I think it's, if you think about a company, it's not like the future is not like, everybody's gone and the AI is running everything. But what I think about is that there are two parts. When you make a decision, like there are two parts to it. You are assembling all the parts to make the decision and you're making the decision. So the AI assembles all the parts to make the decision and the human makes the decision. And so you're spending more time making decisions than assembling and doing all the grunt work behind it. And I feel that's the relationship, and it's still judgment eventually goes back to the human. And they're not spending all this time assembling it, but they're just saying, I'm going to make the decision quicker because I just have all of it in the, at my disposal.
Well, the future is bright. Look, I'm very excited to have met you, to have had the opportunity to chat about what you're doing. Full disclosure, I'm actually thinking to myself, I wonder if I can get Bicycle and apply it to a couple of the businesses I work with, because I really, awesome. It's a really interesting concept. And even if it makes me 10% better, that's a huge win for me. So that's not a paid advertisement. That's just me, as I say, very excited by
I appreciate that, Paul.
Very, very excited by the idea that I can have an AI buddy next to me helping me get some early warnings about things happening in my companies. Having said that, where can people go to learn more if they're interested in learning more about agentic analytics and some of this guided problem solving?
I think bicycle.ai, that's the website. Pretty comprehensive. It's for personas, it's for verticals, it's for roles, ton of stuff there. And then I post, we just launched self-service, on my LinkedIn profile. So Bhaskar Sunkara, you can look me up. And then, so I post on sort of things we're doing with respect to the product. We just launched self-service, as I mentioned, and anybody in travel, retail, or payments can just go to the website, sign up, and then start using it. Like, it's actually that straightforward.
Excellent. Well, Bhaskar, thanks for joining us today, mate.
Absolutely, man. Thanks for having me.
All right, excellent. Well, that's a wrap, everyone. If you've got any questions or comments about today's episode, we'd love to hear from you, as always. So drop us a line in the comment section. You can hit up Cloudera on LinkedIn, @Cloudera. We'll reach them. As always, tremendous array of guests coming up. The producers have been hard at work. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, and I hope you have, make sure to like, subscribe, and share with others so you and they don't miss a drop. Thanks again to Cloudera for hosting another episode of the AI Forecast. We're coming up on our 2-year anniversary very shortly. Thanks again for listening in. We'll see you all next week.